From the House of the Temple in Washington, D.C., this is the Tyler's Place podcast. I'm your host, Maynard Edwards, 32nd degree KCCH, and we're brought to you by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite Southern Jurisdiction. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope your summer is going well. Hope you and your family are safe amidst these trying times. A couple of pieces of information. If you have not checked out our Scottish Rite SJ members only page and you're a Scottish Rite Southern Jurisdiction Mason, go ahead and check it out. You're going to need your membership number to join, which you can find on your member ID card, which you can either get from your Valley Secretary if you haven't done that already, or you can log on to your member portal account at scottishrite.org. So check that out. It's a lot of great conversations going on there. It's a nice little Facebook community being built, and it is indeed truly Scottish Rite Southern Jurisdiction members only. So please stop by and join up. It's definitely worth the time to do so. Also, if you're not aware, Master Craftsman is now available online. 2 portions of the Master Craftsman program are available online. You can go to scottishrite.org and log in to find out more, or you can go to scottishrightstore.org to purchase those. And right now, the Symbolic Lodge program is available online, and the Ritual and History Master Craftsman program is available online. So check those out when you get a chance. If you're not a Master Craftsman, it's something you definitely should check out. I think it's great for all Masons to get these programs, not just Scottish Rite Masons. And if you're a Scottish Rite Mason, it really is going to be the icing on the cake for your Scottish Rite experience. So do check that out. Joining me now is author John Dickie, and he is an Italian studies professor from England. And he has written several books, including one bestseller about the Mafia, and he's now turned his attention to Freemasonry. The book is called The Craft. It's available now wherever books are sold. It's also available on Audible if you're an audiobook listener like I am. And John, I've got to ask you, how do you go from writing about the Mafia to writing about Freemasons?
There's a funny story behind that. I'm a professor of Italian studies. That's what I do for a living, and a lot of my research so far has been about the Mafia. I'm a historian of the Mafia, if you like. And a good few years ago, back in about 2013, they arrested a Mafia boss who'd been on the run from Sicily for 20 years, living in an anonymous suburb in West London. And they arrested him in August. And that's not something that happens every day in London, as you can imagine. So I was on all the TV news programs and radio news and so on and so forth, with people asking me, basic questions. What is the Mafia? And I said, well, it's... I defined it the way Sicilian mafiosi often do when they turn state's evidence. And they said it's like the Freemasonry, only for criminals. And that's true in a number of senses, which I can talk about. So when I got home at the end of the day, I got an email from the then head of communications at the United Grand Lodge of England, a guy called Mike Baker, who's sadly recently passed away, saying that he'd been getting lots of panicked calls from Freemasons thinking that I was accusing them of being the Mafia, which is not as unthinkable in the UK as it is in America, where people tend to have a much darker view. The embedded stereotypes in public opinion about the Freemasons are much more negative. And so he said, well, would you like to come in for a chat? And of course, I was delighted to. I knew a little bit about Freemasonry historically in the Italian context already because of their links to the origins of indirect links to the origins of the Sicilian Mafia in the 19th century. And so I had a walk around Freemasons Hall in London and a good chat, and they told me about the archive and so on. And of course, immediately as a historian, your eyes light up. And the more I thought about it, what that visit gave me more than anything else was a sense of how Freemasons feel, in the UK at least, defensive and misunderstood, and at the same time very passionate about their Masonry. And I've talked to a lot of Freemasons since, and that's confirmed my view. And I knew enough to know that there was a world of other stories there that, readers of all kinds, historians for other disciplines, would be interested in, that there was a growing body of historiography on Freemasonry, not just by Masons, but by other Masons and so on and so forth. And that somehow needed bringing together in a book that hopefully would be of interest to Masons and non-Masons alike. So that's how we got from the Mafia to the, as I say in the book, that there are strands of the Masonic DNA in the Sicilian Mafia, and you can trace the connection, trace how we got there, which is what I do in one chapter of the book.
So the book in and of itself, is it written in the form of a novel? Is it written in more of a history text? What form does the book itself take? It's sort of, in the description on Amazon, it comes across as more of a novel, more of a story.
No, it's a work of history, but I use narrative, and you can check up all the footnotes and references there aren't footnotes, but the references in the back, all very detailed. It's there so that scholars can follow up and challenge what I've written, which is, as it should be. But the reason that my book on the Sicilian Mafia sold nearly 1 million copies is that, I have non-academic readers in mind, non-specialist readers in mind. I like to think that, I can write the reader I have in mind is somebody who's a commuter on a crowded train in London, holding on with one hand, and reading a book with the other hand, who doesn't have time to leaf through and wants something that's going to keep them reading between one stop and the next. So I make big demands of myself in terms of writing prose that keeps people reading and is riveting. So I try to combine the scholarship and the pace of the writing.
As you have gone through the history of Masons in the UK, and I would guess you've also had to do some examination of Masons in the state, are there differences? Are there things that jumped out at you? You mentioned the darker connotations of things here in the States. Is that the starkest difference?
Perhaps it's easier if I just take a step back, if you don't mind, and tell you a little bit more about the approach I've adopted in the book. I cover 400 years of history.
That's all.
And globally as well. And nobody, outside of a 50-volume encyclopedia, nobody could hope to cover that territory. So what I've done is been selective, chosen moments in different countries around the world that to me represent something important, significant, or merely just interesting and curious. About really, my point is to concentrate on the point where Freemasonry encounters society. I try not to drag my readers into the great, long-standing internal debates about different denominations and degree systems and all of that kind of thing, because frankly, for non-Masons, that sort of stuff is tedious. It's much more important to get across certainly why Masons invest so much time in that. But for me, it's much more interesting is where Freemasonry encounters some of the main currents of history. So in order to do that, I moved from Edinburgh and London, where we begin, to Paris, where we begin to encounter the French Revolution and the birth of the first Masonic conspiracy theories, to Italy, where we get the sort of politicized version of Freemasonry that emerged under Napoleon and afterwards, Then we moved to the United States with George Washington and the use of Freemasonry as a civic religion, and its aftermath, the Morgan affair. Then we're still in the United States with the Civil War and Pike and so on, the Scottish Rite. Then we moved back to Europe for the culture wars in Catholic countries in Europe over secularization. It's the Catholic Church essentially was in a long battle with secularizers over things like civil marriage, education, the influence, whether the church should have an influence over education, divorce, that kind of thing. And Freemasons were very prominent in that, and Freemasonry was very prominent in that. Then I moved to the subject of the British Empire and Freemasonry's role in the spread of the British Empire around the world, concentrating particularly on the Mother Lodge, Kipling's poem. That's my key. And I look at India in the moments when Kipling was a young man and a young Freemason. Then I moved to the repression of Freemasonry under the dictatorships, mid-20th century dictatorships. Then I moved back to the US for the 60s, 50s, 60s, and if you like, the high peak of Masonic membership in the late 50s, 60s, but also civil rights and the upheavals of that period. Then I'm back to Italy for the P2 story. And then for my final chapter is a kind of tour of the world where I pick up some of the threads that of the story so far, really, of all of the different chapters. So it's a very, some would say quirky. I've had to be selective, and undoubtedly keeping up readers' interest has been one of the criteria I've borne in mind, as well as trying to kind of be representative of the sense that this is a global phenomenon and so on and so forth. So a lot of thought went into that, the selection of those moments that take me all over the world and so on. And it's one of the things I'm very interested to hear people respond about.
What has the response been from Masons that have previewed the book?
I don't know. I haven't had any feedback from Masons in the States. In Britain, I've been, I have to say, surprised and delighted. I've had some wonderful feedback from Freemasons. One I can think of locally, I'm in my mother's house at the moment, and I spoke to a Mason just locally, just by way of getting a cross-section of opinion, and he read it and said that he found it both illuminating and challenging, and that's kind of exactly the balance I'm hopeful. The United Grand Lodge of England have been wonderful and have now recommended it for to their members as Christmas reading. The librarian Martin Cherry at the Museum of Freemasonry in London, who was a wonderful archivist librarian, has read it and was very complimentary about it and really liked it. I've suddenly followed by hundreds of Freemasons on Twitter.
We follow you on the street too, just so you know. We're watching.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm being watched as we speak. And no, the reaction's been really good. I've got lots of invitations to talk. I'm doing a big lecture over Zoom for the United Grand Lodge of England and for other Masonic organizations. So I'm delighted with how it's going. I don't expect people to, agree with everything, but I hope it's something that feeds into Masonic culture rather than just being rejected, as I think is understandable with a lot of the usual journalistic stuff that comes out in the UK. Which is rubbish, frankly. So that's my hope, anyway.
When you've done writing on the Mafia, when you've done certainly more dangerous than the Freemasons, I can't imagine you were legitimately worried about any of the, you hear the Morgan affair and, oh, this guy was going to, he disappeared. You didn't ever have any real concern about any of those kind of things, especially after writing about the Mafia for so long.
So let me tell you, I've written about the Mafia, and I make documentary programs for Italian TV, and I've been in prisons where most of the occupants are mafiosi, and they pointed to me and said, "Oh yeah, you're the guy off the, blah blah blah." So let me tell you, it's a hell of a lot more dangerous writing a history of Italian food than it for the Italians than it is writing about the Mafia, and that seemed to go all right as well. So that book got made into a TV series in Italy, the first TV history of Italian food in Italy, and I wrote and presented it. So all of that has made me absolutely fearless, foolish, if you like. Short answer.
The book is called The Craft and is available on Amazon. It's also available on Audible. And it looks like from all reports, it's just a fascinating book, and it's for Masons and non-Masons alike. Just one quick question as we wrap things up here. As you kind of look through all of your notes and the history, is there something that as an author, as a historian, as a professor in general about Freemasonry that you found to be the most surprising or most interesting, that something that kind of sticks out as the thing that really was most eye-opening for you in this? I
would go back to those initial meetings with Freemasons when I grew up at a historical moment, which I write about briefly in the final chapter of the book, when there were a lot of, not conspiracy theories about not the kind of lunatic fringe that you get occasionally, but really quite mainstream journalists saying that there was this sort of Masonic lobby inside the police force that was responsible for covering up wrongdoing. And unfortunately, there was a lot of wrongdoing by the police in the 1970s and 80s here. And I realized I'd sort of rather passively absorbed, as I was growing up, that common sense, that sort of what have they got to hide kind of idea that, why else are they getting together if it's not to have some sort of grubby ulterior motive? And that was the thing that first sank in when I first just sat down over coffee with Freemasons. And it's now an experience that's happened to me all over the world, is you ask them about what Freemasonry means to them, and it's not long before the bottom lip starts to go, and people are very emotional about it. And that is something that stays with you, and that I didn't want to kind of betray in the book when I wrote the book. Even though I'm actually critical of the way that some of that sentimentalism can affect the way that Freemasons write the history of their own organization, the kind of anecdotes they remember, the sort of soldiers in white and grey from the Civil War era who are both Masons, who embrace one another on the battlefield, those kinds of stories. I think they need to be treated with a certain caution, historically speaking. There are, but all kinds of Masonic historical writing. As I say, it's quite often about identity narratives. So really, it's that emotional core, both respecting it and yet also having to take a cool historical approach to the kind of history writing that it inspires, that I had to keep with me, when I was writing the book.
That is author John Dickie speaking to us from, as you heard him say, his mother's home in the UK. And the book is The Craft, How Freemasons Made the Modern World. You can check out a review of The Craft in next month's issue of the Scottish Rite Journal. And it's available wherever books are sold. I am an Audible listener guy, and that's not an endorsement of anything. I'm an audiobook guy in general. I'm listening to it now, and I have to tell you, so far, pretty good. Definitely worth checking out. Joining us now in the palatial Tyler's Place podcast studios, the one and only Arturo de Hoyos, our Grand Archivist, your Grand Archivist, to join us for Tyler's Trivia. Brother Art, how you doing, man?
As well as can be expected in these COVID times.
It certainly is an interesting time to not only be alive, but to be a Mason. Lodges are trying to get back to work. Have you had any experience trying to do any kind of degree work or anything in these conditions? Have you witnessed any in what's happening in around the country? I know you get missives from everywhere, but have you actually been a part of anything?
I have not. However, I have a confession to make. I did not realize, not having read my email, that my lodge actually met last night in Virginia. I didn't see it in time to make it out to lodge. It's 100% my fault. I didn't see it, but I was encouraged by the fact that there was a lodge meeting that I could miss.
Indeed, and we'll have some news about that in just a moment. I've got some bad news for you about that particular meeting. I have not done degree work, but I've practiced work, and I've been to a couple of lodge meetings. And all things considered, if we had to do this for a little while, or even for the next year or so, which obviously we all hope for a better outcome than that, but I think it's livable.
Yeah, it is. I mean, Grand Lodges and other appendant bodies are looking at creative ways of continuing Freemasonry. In the situation that we're in right now, some of them more creative than others. I've probably participated in at least, I want to say 30, 35 or more Masonic meetings. I just had one over the weekend on Saturday for a Masonic Rosicrucians meeting in Missouri, at which one of my friends was a speaker. The amazing thing about this, of course, is the speaker's from South Carolina. He's able to speak in Missouri, and I'm in Virginia able to participate. So
yeah, it does definitely have its upside. It's no substitute. And I think, you know what, we are getting the good and the bad of that double-edged sword, because now that I've gotten to hang out with some of my lodge brothers again, you certainly realize that there is no substitute for that one-on-one interaction. But at the same time, it is pretty cool to be able to cross the entire country and have a meeting and have those kind of discussions and hang out.
It's absolutely amazing. The day before, I was able to have a meeting with members of the Supreme Council of South Africa. So jump from South Africa to Missouri in 12 hours isn't bad.
Indeed, not at all. Regarding your lodge meeting, I got an email from your lodge secretary that said good news, bad news this morning. And it said to me, the good news is that I had been elected to become a member of Mount Vernon Lodge. The bad news is that I gotta write the dues check. But this is the nature of our business.
Well, congratulations and welcome to the finest lodge in Virginia.
If you say so yourself.
Well, why, yes.
Well, now that it's going to be my lodge as well, I would have to concur. But I'm really looking forward to it. It's actually on the grounds of Mount Vernon. I've not had a chance to visit, but I'm hoping to do that sometime in the next couple of weeks.
Super. Looking forward to it. I don't know if you're aware of this, if you've seen the building before or
not. I've not. I've never been.
As you said, it mentioned, it is the only lodge in the state of Virginia that actually meets on a portion of George Washington's property, which was, in Mount Vernon. It's in the Mount Vernon area, of course. But the building was an old firehouse.
I heard that.
And has been restored into a lodge room. The one thing I wish they had kept, of course, was the brass pole. That would have made for some interesting parties and quick exits from the lodge.
Indeed.
But such as it is. But it's actually a very nice lodge. It's got some land on it. We're able to do some sales a couple times a year, to help support the lodge and whatnot. But welcome to the lodge. I'm
really looking forward to. I'm a lover of. I don't want to say strange lodges, but lodges with unique pedigree, so to speak. I'm a member of the Invisible Lodge, and I'm a member of the first lodge to start in a shrine in Maryland. So, and now Mount Vernon Lodge. So I love that because it's just kind of cool little clubs to be part of.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things that you can just casually throw out. Oh, well, I'm a member of that lodge also. Right. Or, oh, I'm a member of a lodge in that state or jurisdiction or country or whatever it is.
I'm a member of a lodge that actually meets on George Washington's property.
That's right.
That's cool to me. All right, let's get into Tyler's trivia. Last month, the question was, which 2 degrees switched places and why? And our winning answer comes from Brother Joseph McGoffin from Colorado. And Brother Joseph, I hope I'm saying that correctly. And his answer was that it was the 27th and 28th degrees that were reversed, and it was done in order to present the chivalric degrees in a more logical or natural progression.
Absolutely correct. Winner, winner, chicken dinner.
Excellent. So that took place, the early 2000s when the ritual was revised?
Yeah, that was with the 2004 edition or ritual revision of the Revised Standard Pike Ritual.
Excellent. And so we've got a great prize for Brother Jeffrey there. Thank you for playing along. And now we move on to a trivia question for this edition of the Tyler's Place podcast.
Okay, this one might be a little trickier.
Okay. That one was a softball.
Now, this is a little tougher. Here in the House of the Temple, we have one hall that many people know is a hall that has paintings of regalia. The paintings were done by Robert White, and they depict all of the degrees from the entered apprentice through the 33rd degree. You'll have the apron, collar, jewel, whatever there is for that degree. And if you look closely, you'll see that the apron in the craft degrees, the Master Mason's degree, was modified, that it's no longer the same design as when it was originally painted. So the question is, why?
All right. That is a good one. That is I'm going to have to look that one up myself. That is one I do not know. If you know the answer, please send your answer to podcast@scottishrite.org. And, as we always say, even if you don't get to listen to the podcast right away, that is okay because
we don't choose our winner until just before the program airs. So everybody has an equal chance. So vote early and vote often.
Yeah. Jeez. Thank you, Brother Art. And thank you for the discussion. As always, we will see you in just a couple of weeks.
Sounds good. Looking forward. Take care, guys.
That's going to wrap things up for the Tyler's Place podcast, August 2020 edition. Thank you so much for joining us. I am your host, Maynard Edwards, 32nd degree KCCH. And from all of us here in the House of the Temple in Washington, D.C., we'll catch you next time right here on the Tyler's Place.